Number 1. Bully. My family used to move around a whole lot. That meant when I was younger, I was always changing schools. It got to be very hard to make friends. Not only because of the moving, but because I always expected to be moving again, pretty soon. And that kept me from wanting to make friends, because we moved so often that it seemed futile. So I just mostly kept to myself when I entered a new school. Well, anyone who has been in school knows how the loners are treated, especially in middle school. That was where I was in my education when the story takes place, and my family had moved to a semi-rural area, and I remember this as being the worst time of my life, and I still consider it that way. I was in the 7th grade at the time. I remember this is the year I turned 13. I was just a bit of a small kid, and the fact that I was quiet and a loner just made this whole thing worse on me. The bullying started pretty early, and it was pretty nasty too. In fact, it had gotten so bad that I would try to make myself sick in the morning, sometimes to avoid going to school. I would wear wet socks to bed, or something like that, because back then we actually thought something like that could make you sick. There was constant name-calling. Kids would always try to force me into fights when I didn't want to fight, and for no reason. Hell, I remember one of the 2 bullies held me while another burst a water balloon on me. And then they went around joking and telling everyone that I'd had a wet dream. It was horrible and humiliating, just being at that school. And the worst part of it all is that the teachers at the school never did anything about it. It was on the bus, too. A few of the guys who gave me a hard time at school were on the bus, and thus lived in the same general area as I did. But fortunately, I lived about 45 minutes away from school, and out in the country. So being home was always the best thing for me because I never encountered any of the bullies who tormented me there. Summer vacation was obviously my favorite time of year, and that particular summer, it was even more welcome than before. I was able to just be home and not have to deal with the constant torment that was visited upon me. One of my favorite things was to go exploring out in the woods, and I would do that maybe a few times a week during the summer. There was a lot of woods in the area, and I was never short of space to explore. Sometime in the middle of the summertime, I was out exploring in an area that I had never been in before, and I had come across some berry bushes, and was surprised to find lots of blackberries. I decided I would pick them and bring them home because they were really pretty good. I got really upset at one point when I came across a dead squirrel. It was obvious that the squirrel had been shot, and it was just left dead there. Whoever shot it was doing it for fun, not for food. I later found a bird that was in the same condition. It was heartbreaking to see any of it, and I wondered why people like to kill animals for fun. While I was hiking out in this new area, I heard some of what sounded like footfalls every now and then. I never encountered any people when I was out exploring. I only once in a while came across an animal that wasn't a bird or a squirrel, but it was never anything dangerous before. But the footfalls I was hearing seemed like they were something bigger. It wasn't something that bothered me. I didn't think there were any big dangerous cats or anything like that around, but I did get concerned though when I heard what sounded like someone was laughing, because then I knew that if I had heard it correctly, there was a person out there in the woods with me. My first thought was that I could get in trouble for trespassing. I didn't know who owned the land that I was exploring on, so I began to get a little scared. I decided I would travel back toward my house, or at least try and find a road and walk along that. So I went off, and I kept hearing sounds that indicated that someone was in the woods with me, and I kept looking around, trying to see who it could be, but whenever I looked in the direction of the sounds, I didn't see or hear anything. Then, I heard the laughing sound again, and when I turned around to face it this time, my heart froze in my chest. I was terrified because I was looking at a kid named Billy, who bullied me hard in school. and he was with his friend Kyle, who also bullied me. And the scariest thing of all was that both of them had rifles. They emerged from behind the trees to face me. I didn't know what to do, and I was terrified from the scary smiles on their face. I thought about the dead squirrel and the dead bird, and I was positive that these two kids killed them. Kids my age at the time shouldn't be out in the woods with rifles. I'm sorry. Being 13 and doing that is just wrong in my opinion. And the proof I have is that both of them pointed their rifles right at me. Billy taunted me, calling me horrible names. I actually have rather full lips for a boy, and the boys called me N-word lips, but they didn't say N-word all the time, and they started calling me that then. I turned to run, and as soon as I did, I heard a gunshot. I didn't feel anything, so I know that I didn't get shot myself, but I was terrified by it, and I fell to the ground. Kyle and Billy ran up to me and pointed their rifles at me. They called me names and made fun of me because I was scared. I didn't want to move, and I just laid on the ground, hearing their insults and being terrified. It was the worst feeling I had ever had in my life. But then the most amazing thing happened. "Billy, what the fuck are you doing?" I heard a man's voice call out. "Dad, we were just playing around, weren't we?" he asked me, and had a look in his eye that said he would shoot me if I didn't agree. "They were hunting me," I told Billy's dad. The huge man grabbed the rifle out of Billy's hand and put it on the ground. He then said 4 words I will never ever forget. "Cut me a switch." Billy looked terrified, but he took out his pocket knife and cut a switch from a bush or something. He handed it to his dad, and his dad whooped his ass with the switch in front of all of us. He reduced Billy to tears, and I could tell Kyle was scared that he would be next, but luckily for him, Billy's dad didn't punish him. "Help the boy up," the dad demanded, and Billy did as he was told. "Apologize right now." Billy apologized, and the dad asked me if I was all right to get home on my own. I told him I was fine. He then grabbed the rifle in one hand, Billy in the other, and the 3 of them went off, and I think Billy was going to be a lot worse for the wear when he got home with his dad. Although my story has something of a happy ending, it was still a terrifying experience. Bullies are scary to begin with, but bullies willing to kill animals for fun are much worse. Billy never bullied me again. He just gave me horrible looks in school, but he never even talked to me. Number 2. Bully 2. I have something to admit to you, and I will get it out of the way right now. I'm not the hero of this story. I'm the bad guy. I was the bully. It is something now that as a much older man, I regret being. So I'm doing this story anonymously. I know that in the comments I'm gonna get a lot of hate. Testosterone is the great equalizer. It turns all boys into morons. And I was a big mean moron. There was this kid in school. He was a junior. He transferred to the school when he was a sophomore, and he got really popular for doing a rendition of "Losing My Religion" in a lip sync contest. He became popular with several different cliques. He was known as a clique jumper. He would hang out with the punks, the burnouts, the popular crowd. It was weird how everyone liked this kid. When he was a junior, he and I had the same gym class. There was an article in the school newspaper about LGBTQ students at the school. One interview was with a guy who gave the fake name of Tim. We all suspected it was this guy, and he never denied it when he was approached about it. I had bullied a couple of other people in school. This girl Mandy, who was a punk, I threw her head first into a locker. She was a friend of his. Another friend of his, Phil, I beat the shit out of him when he came out of the restroom, and that one almost got me kicked off the football team. But they really needed my talent, so that didn't happen. Jocks always get the breaks, and I was taking advantage of it. So I began bothering this guy. I find it hard to say his name out loud, but It was Josh. I don't know why it bugs me, but it does. There came a time when Josh eventually became the object of my bullying, and that was one of the biggest mistakes I have ever made in my life. Josh was a thin guy. He had longish black hair, but he had these eyes. If you've ever seen Donnie Darko, you would know what I mean. Hell, that movie scared me because it made me remember Josh. Well, this happened in the hallway. Josh was walking and I pushed him hard from the back. Surprisingly, he didn't fall over, even though I pushed him hard. Josh turned and looked at me, and rather than being scared, he smiled at me and chuckled. "So, you finally targeted me," he chuckled. I wasn't scared of him. I told him to take his best shot. He didn't do anything. He just looked at me. People gathered around expecting a fight, but Josh wouldn't make a move. He just stood there looking at me. It was unnerving, and I finally just called him a wuss and turned to walk away. At that moment, I felt someone jump on my back and literally knock me into the floor. It had to be Josh, and he started banging my head into the floor. I was unable to do anything because of the blows to my head. "Don't you fucking ever threaten me again, you motherfucker!" He was yelling at me. He had gone full-blown psycho, and I was shocked at the force this little guy had. He must have had the adrenaline rush of all time. Someone finally pulled him off of me. There was a lot of commotion, but I heard one of my buddies say to Josh, "You fucking worship the devil." I will never forget Josh's response to that. "No, he worships me." Josh didn't get in trouble for the incident. There was no way that I was going to admit a scrawny dude kicked my ass. I let it slide. But that is not the end of the story. Josh got a reputation for being a psychopath after that, and he fully embraced it. A couple of the other big dudes did try to provoke him into a fight, but they never went as far as hitting him or anything. They remembered what happened to me. Whenever Josh saw me in the hallway, he would smile at me, and that evil little smile that he had. I tried to act tough, but I admit that the kid scared the hell out of me. It didn't stop there. One day Josh followed me home from school. He kept his distance, but he was obviously trying to find out where I lived. I should have gone somewhere else, but I did get to my home, and him knowing where I lived just began to make everything worse. You see, I didn't know this at the time, but Josh had gotten bullied a lot before high school, and I guess it pushed him down, and eventually pushed him over the edge. I mean, think about harboring all that resentment for years and years, and then finally you have to let it out. This kid was gonna let it out on me. For example, one night I heard a rock hit the house by my bedroom window. I went to the window and Josh was there standing in my backyard. He was looking up at the window and smiling at me. It was nighttime, but the light was on. He stood just on the edge of the light and smiled at me. He didn't do anything, though. I could have gotten my parents or called the police, but remember, I was the tough guy. I couldn't admit that this little guy was scaring the shit out of me. I just shut the blinds and did my best to pretend he wasn't there. In the morning, when I was leaving for school, I stepped out of the door. There was a decapitated doll head hanging from the top of the porch by its hair. I can't tell you how terrified that made me. I tore it down, and a couple wasps flew out of it and began stinging me, so I ran off from them. I have no idea how he did that. The next day at school was weird. Josh and I were in the same gym class. When we were doing laps, he kept making sure he was running close to me. It was unnerving. I think Josh was somewhat shy and didn't like to shower after gym. Gym was in the last period. This time he did, though. I looked, yeah, I think everyone did, and sheesh, Josh was hung like a freaking horse. He looked at me and started laughing his ass off. Other than scaring me, he was now humiliating me too. But that wasn't the worst thing that ever happened. He was not tormenting me as bad as he eventually would. A few days later in the hallway, I pushed a girl out of my way. Little did I know that Josh was there, and it was a friend of his. I couldn't back down from him, when he attacked me from behind. So I figured I could beat the crap out of him finally. Josh laughed at me when I confronted him. He told me he would show me why he wasn't scared of me. He then actually punched himself in the face a few times. Then he bashed his own head into the lockers until he started to bleed. And then he turned to me and just looked with that evil Donnie Darko grin. And Josh asked me, if I'm willing to do that to myself, just think about what I would be willing to do to you if you ever bug one of my friends again. It was a scary scene. I backed down. I think anyone would have in my position. I put my hands up and I walked away. Josh still gave me scary looks from now to then, but he toned down after that. I think it's because I never bugged one of his friends ever again. That kid was fucking crazy. I don't want to ever cross him again. Amy. Hi, my name is Amy, and for my first birthday I got a pound purry. It was a stuffed cat with gray markings. I took him everywhere with me. One night I woke up at 3 a.m. because I would hear whispering, and I looked around and saw nothing. I went back to sleep, and then I woke up again to hearing what sounded like purring. There were no cats in my room at the time, and I was young and thought maybe I had dreamt it. The next night, the same things happened, and I got a little freaked out. So I put him in my closet, and there he stayed for years. When I was 18, I was cleaning out my closet and I saw him in one of the boxes that I had stashed away. And I was so happy because I had been looking for him. And I put him in my bed again. When I slept and kept waking up to hear whispering and purring every hour or so, I then remembered that I used to hear that, and that's why he was in the closet. When I moved out, I took him with me, and I was letting my roommate's baby play with it. Then she said, "Aunt Amy gave it to you." I couldn't just take it away after she said that, so I hope she had better luck with him. I wish I had him back, and I miss him so much. I know it's not as scary as some of your stories, but I thought I'd share. Number 4. Shilo and the Tornado, the Snowstorm and the Tree. One of the strangest things I'd ever witnessed in my young life at the time was the weather. I was all of about 14 or 15 years old. My mother and I were very close. I went with her almost everywhere because of my juvenile diabetes, so over the years, we saw some pretty strange happenings. This was one of them. This particular day in late January or early February in Little Rock, Arkansas, was an unusually warm day for that time of year, and the weather acted as if it had no idea what it wanted to turn into. Its fickleness was driving us all crazy. It started in the low 40s the previous day, and by the next had gone from 50 or so up to 65, 70 degrees. At the moment, my mother and I had debated whether to wear a jacket or a sweater, carry an umbrella or stocking cap. So once the debate was over, we just took a few different types of clothing items and tossed them in the back seat of our '98 gold Oldsmobile, the only car that looked and acted more like a Cadillac than any other car out there, and for a little over half the price. It hugged the streets like a caddy when it was dry and plowed the snow like a tank or snowplow during the winter. It was a very dependable vehicle, that car. They don't make them like that anymore. No one else could stay on the road in ice, snow, or other inclement weather and go right up a hill even without chains like my mother's gold olds. My mother's Daisy, as she used to call it, was always referred to as a she. I could never abide referring to ships or vehicles as female. I felt then and still do that it is very demeaning because it makes us into inanimate objects. I to this day deem it an insult to all females and such. I find it degenerating and ingratiating, but I digress. My mother and I headed for the car, exiting our trailer that resided on my uncle, her brother's land. My chocolate cream tortoiseshell cat, Shilo, was with me on an 8 collar and leash, much like the harness of today. Shilo was tiny but strong-willed like me, and my beautiful black-haired mother. My mother had 3 rules: do not fuck with her car, her animals, and most of all, her children. Oh, and her hair. 4 rules. She had a mass of thick, wavy black hair that rivaled any glamour queen. Entering the car, the weather had changed to blustery, much to my mother's dismay. The wind blew her perfect hair in her face, so she carried the umbrella open in front of her to shield herself. The sky darkened to an ominous mass of black clouds, entering her gold olds. Roomy enough to carry 7 children, 5 cats, and upteen grocery bags of various items, my mother would say. We settled into the car, looking out across the woods that lined either side of the long dirt road. We'd have to drive down to get to the 2-lane paved road that would lead us to our destination, the country store, located about 10 miles west of our present location, home. Kathy, my mother said. My siblings and friends always call me Cat. This almost looks and smells like tornado weather. Really? I answered in response. I regarded her quizzically. She hadn't heard my question. More seriously this time I asked, Really? She seemed to be deep in thought. Shilo settled on the large dashboard, covered in soft faux leather, which suited her just fine. She would sniff it and get herself comfortable for the ride. She loved to come along with me and my mom in the car. My nose agreed with her. I loved the smell of the interior as well, and showed my appreciation by breathing in a long, deep breath. Nice, I thought. But not for long. Mother said, Maybe we should wait for a while. The weather is a bit strange. I trusted my mother's intuition, but was annoyed because I hated getting ready to go somewhere, and then having to change plans or not go after all. Shilo from the dashboard, her large but angry-shaped golden yellow cat's eyes, peered at me questioningly. Her eyes flicked towards Mother, as though to say, So are we going or not? I want meat. I smiled when the car started. Shilo meowed in agreement and gave a slow blink, which my mother returned, as Shilo's tongue flicked out over her 2-tone colored nose, as Mother put the car in gear to head out for the 10-mile trek to the grocery store, closest to where we lived, way out in Nowheresville, Arkansas. My window cracked slightly. The sudden smell of rain caught my attention. It was rather warm this time of year, very unusual but not unheard of, according to my mother. As she pulled out of the drive, the car engine roared in approval, as if it were saying, I'm ready to go. As the illusion of the trees moving began to sway, as if in a silent dance, to an infrasound concert we humans could not hear, though Shilo could. The wind picked up a little more as we moved along now, down the paved road that was also lined on both sides with a vast system of untouched wood. Shilo and I had not long before encountered a pretty scary being or shadow-like creature on the right side, closest to where I sat. As we drove past, I averted my eyes to avoid looking in that direction, feeling myself tensing up the closer we were to it. Shilo reacted much the same way when she moved across the dashboard onto my mother's side. Mother gently coaxed her back onto my side, so that she would not interfere with her driving. As we moved onto the paved road, I felt myself easing up. As we moved further away, the clouds were now dancing to the same symphony that the trees were swaying to, and in unison, and at times independently of one another. There was that acrid smell that almost always accompanied tornadoes, and that sort of yellowish-greenish tinge on the horizon that sickeningly, it literally made you nauseous. Demanded attention and response, quick and deliberate. Still, it was beautiful. We know nature can be deadly at times like this, and we are at its mercy as she likes to play with us to see how far she can be pushed. Sometimes to our detriment, right to the edge, and sometimes over it and to our demise. And that's why we need to treat her well. About a mile up the road, Shilo's fur was almost standing on end as she kept flicking her tail back and forth, and along the sides of her beautiful, multicolored, chocolate cream coat, flicking, almost shuddering, in a random sequence. Static electricity was in the air, and though the temperature did not change, I reflexively pulled my jacket closer around me. I felt colder suddenly, as if in answer to some awful portent about to befall all of us at any moment. I glanced at my mother, speeding along. As we moved closer to our destination, I could see her hair move, the invisible fingers of static electricity causing my mother's hair to become magnetized. Seemingly alive, her hair and mine, along with Shilo's fur, parried with the air itself. My mother and I, now mostly silent, drew nearer to our destination. About a mile or two from there, we saw the unmistakable sign of a full-blown tornado. No good place to be in the middle of a wooded area, and we saw it, thankfully, as it moved away from us. The ground soaked, as the hail and torrential rain began to fall. As it started pelting us, Mother instinctively pulled to the side of the road to avoid what the weather report on the radio suspected to be the worst of it. Before we arrived, it had been raining for a while, and now was spreading out across the rest of the area. When the sirens started, Mother and I cringed at the dreaded sound, and Shilo decided to retreat from the dashboard across my lap and into my jacket, squeezing behind me and the seat on my right, and then around to my left to position herself to peer out. I scratched her cheek in approval. My mother took my hand and told me it would be all right because Jesus is here, so we both said a prayer for our and all other living beings' safety as well. As the rain poured and the sirens wailed, we sat quietly as the weather suddenly eased up and seemed to quiet down almost as suddenly as it began. As it dissipated, we were wrong to think this was all Mother Nature had to show that day. Okay, my mother sighed, as she took in a deep breath, as though she had been holding it the entire time. She let go of my left hand and drove. I didn't even have to look. I heard the jangling of the keys as we lurched forward off of the muddy side of the road. Shilo stealthily and gracefully moved from my left side and back onto the dash to just watch as the rain suddenly became sleet and then turned into snow flurries. She was my very own live bobblehead, and at one point my mother almost turned around to head for home, but since we were almost there, she continued to see it through. That mother's intuition again. We could see the store and suddenly felt the air get even colder. I couldn't believe that there was rain, hail, snow, and a tornado, all within the span of 20 minutes. My attention was jerked from the weather, however, when the sudden screeching of tires up ahead told us all to prepare for an impact. Fortunately, we came to a dead stop behind a line of cars, at least 4 or 5, that were trying to turn into the same parking lot. We all had the same idea, at the exact same millisecond. Mother stopped at exactly the right time to avoid the car in front with a man, his wife, and his children. Then there was what sounded like wood splintering, metal scratching, scraping, and the shattering of glass. The unmistakable sound of a car crash. Something hit the top of the hood of Mother's car. "Oh God!" I heard my mother cry out, her right arm instinctively crossing in front of me as though the car was still moving. The sound was gut-wrenchingly terrifying. Had a car hit us, my 15-year-old mind would have begun coming up with all sorts of awful ideas, body parts flying, blood everywhere, a head rolling across and hitting the hood of the car behind us. Well, that is what my 15-year-old girl's mind was like, at its peak of imagination, especially since I was into action-adventure books and films, mysteries, suspense, and most of all, horror genres, and the macabre. I looked quickly to see that my mother was fine, not a scratch. As to myself, Shilo had squeezed herself under my jacket and left arm again, without me even knowing it, as if she'd somehow mysteriously appeared magically and suddenly glued to my left side, and because she refused to move, I just left her there. My mother's mouth opened to speak, but I answered her silent question. "We are all fine, Mom, not a scratch." A slight smile played at the corners of her parted rose-colored lips, in stark contrast to her jet-black hair. Fleetingly, it gave her the look of a vampire. I was into vampires back then, having acquired one of the first copies of Interview with a Vampire, which I still have today. At the moment I imagined her as a vampire. I was a little envious because I didn't look that way. Still, I smiled to reassure her. When I saw the car, I got a sudden flashback of what had happened, and in a dreamlike state, I remembered seeing a huge tree on the right side of the road, falling and crushing the trunk of the car. Not far out in front of us, I saw in slow motion as the front of the car was lifted into the air from the weight of the black oak that fell on it. The objects that hit the front of our car were some of the branches of that same tree Mother had, by the grace of God, stopped in time to avoid. My mother was, along with W, my husband, two of the most trustworthy drivers I've ever known. My mother had one accident her entire life, and it was the other driver's fault. Looking out through the windshield, through the now thickly falling snow, I watched, as if in a trance, as the snowflakes swirled across the glass like a troupe of ballet dancers in their white tutus and leotards, lifting, twirling, circling one another in a continual courtship. The car in front of us, with the now back window caved in, still had some pieces of glass clinging desperately to the rear window while the falling snow sifted in through the hole, creating a small but rapidly growing drift on the rear inner backboard and seat. My attention was finally pulled from the car in front of me by the boy and the two little girls and the mother. They were crying and screaming for help. Shilo clung closer to me, her cat ears pricking up to the high screams and yells of desperation, reacting before any of the rest of us mere humans ever heard it. Cats had the best hearing of any domestic animal in the world. People from the other cars were starting to get out and were crowding around with offers of help before the police arrived. My mother had gotten to the car first because she had been a nurse, but had to give that up because she unexpectedly passed out during an operation when she heard the sound of the doctor's scalpel cutting into a patient during an appendectomy. Reluctantly, she'd given that up to become a full-time nurse and mother to 7 patient, though sometimes impatient, children of her own. The white snow in her black hair was of no mind to her now that she was on a mission to help in any way she could. It turned out that everyone in the car had miraculously survived. The 3 children, the mother, and the father got a few minor cuts and bruises from branches that found their way into the vehicle, and my mother was graciously and humbly thanked for her help by the husband who had been previously knocked unconscious, and his head hit the roof of the car. We made it to the store. The car sustained only a few scratches, to my mother's chagrin, and we made it back home again in the middle of a snowstorm, before it all turned to ice. So thankfully we got what we needed, and Shilo got the meat she meowed for, in case we were snowed in. My mother's intuition was justified after all, and her prayers were mercifully answered by Christ when no one was seriously injured, and I lived to tell the tale. This concludes another terrifyingly exciting and scary adventure in the never-ending saga, or weather report, of me and Shilo, and Shilo the tornado, the snowstorm, and the tree. Meow. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. First, I want to apologize for the time it took this video to get out. As I think everyone knows, there was a huge storm that went across the entire country. Now, we started getting stuff here on Thursday. That was the day this video was supposed to be posted. But power went out, internet went out, and it would come on every now and then, but then go right off. So I lost a lot of information and work when it first shut off that I couldn't recover. And because I couldn't get on the internet, I was not able to record any stories because I use the internet a lot for what I do. You can see right here that usually I put pictures of cats at the end of my videos. I'm showing you pictures of one of the things that happened here. We had trees, big trees that got blown over. There were two in our backyard that pulled the soil out of the ground and made big mounds of soil. Fell on my neighbor's house. Fortunately, nothing bad happened to our house. But yeah, that was something else, and I'm glad it's over, but I should be getting back on a better schedule. I know I've said that before, but I'm feeling good. I'm more determined. I had been depressed for a while. I get into those moods. But that wind, oh wow, that just completely came out of nowhere. We had gusts up to 90 miles per hour. And it's just amazing that there wasn't a lot more damage than there was. But as you see in the pictures here, the tree fell out, pulled down the cable and the electric wires, went through the roof and through the window of a car that was driving at the time. I don't know if the passengers were alright, but I hope they were. There was nothing that I could find on the news or on the internet that talked about that. But anyhow, I hope you like the stories. I hope that any of you that were involved in the windstorm or the other parts of the storm are doing okay. And I will see you hopefully in a couple days. Don't forget to like and subscribe and, hit the bell. If you're not getting notifications for the videos, it's probably because you didn't hit the bell by the subscribe button. So go ahead and do that. You should get notifications. But in the meantime, don't forget to check in your closet. Check under your bed because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.